Welcome, welcome. Jonathan, nice to see you. So we are at 3:02. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off just because I want to make sure we leave enough time for you all at the end to ask questions. So again, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you all for joining this session. It means a lot because you had other sessions that you could attend to and you decided to come here. So I hope you do enjoy this presentation. My name is Satra Taylor, and I manage the inaugural cohort of the Justice Fellows Policy Program, and I'm the lead of Organizational Effectiveness and Impact at Operation Restoration. Before I kick us off on the presentation, I would like to hand it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves as well. Alexa, would you like to go first?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am super excited for this panel and this discussion today. My name is Alexa Garza. I am from Dallas, Texas. I am an independent Braille transcriber, which is a skill set I learned while incarcerated in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I'll pass it on to Rabia, my sister in white there.
All the love. Thank you, Alexa. It is such a pleasure being in this panel. I mean, I'm talking about power, right? Voices of women of color. And let's not forget, we have all the races, we have all the mix going on over here. So it's amazing. I just want to say, so thank you for this space. My name is Rabia Kutab, and I am a formerly incarcerated woman. I am one of the Justice Fellows inaugural for this institution with Education Trust, representing Los Angeles, California area. My incarceration period was occurred in state of Texas. However, the reentry began in LA. There are reasons to that. I do believe that in a very, very Republican state, it's hard for a person with the conviction, with the record to be able to have a successful reentry in a way that you want it to be. I work a lot in advocacy work in higher education. Currently, I'm doing a lot of work in reentry. Reentry is number one for anybody who has done time period of incarceration and getting out. So thank you for having me here.
No, thank you for being here. And I just want to shout out these two women. You'll hear me say it again. I remember when I called both of them just to let them know that they have made it. And well, they were selected and if they would accept our invitation and just how much they have grown to be joining me on this panel today and just like how they're able to just engage in these conversations and talk about the issues and be able to formulate and the concepts and just connect everything is just phenomenal. Both of them join coalition meetings. They're working with Ed Trust partners across the states. And so I did just want to shout them out before we get started and into the conversation today. So I just want to quickly go over the agenda. So I'm going to start by giving us some context about Pell Grants for incarcerated students because it's important when we're talking about higher education opportunities. I'll then share a brief overview of the Justice Fellows Policy Program. If you were able to join us for the last boot camp, we really had an in-depth conversation about the creation, the purpose, and some of the outcomes that we had hoped with the Justice Fellows Policy Program. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time today to do that again, but I'll provide some brief context for those who were not able to join us. Afterwards, we'll then go into the state policy scan specifically, sharing our framework that we created alongside the Justice Fellows. We'll look at two states. Alexa will talk about Texas. Rabia will talk about California as they were co-leaders in doing that research and analysis. We'll talk a little bit about the policy recommendations as well, and they'll tap into a couple of them that they want to talk more in depth from their lived experiences. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. So again, please use the chat. We have our Ed Trust staff member, Brittany, monitoring the chat. I will as well. So no questions will be lost. The other thing I want to add is that the policy scans have not been published yet, okay? So you all are getting a sneak peek. This is exclusive. This is a highlight of joining this session, okay? So I do ask that you all not tweet out, even though I have my Twitter there. Please do not tweet. any of the findings or any of the like policy frameworks. We're looking to publish sometime in January the toolkit and the analysis. So please look out for that. And if you are not listed on the EdTrust listserv or signed up, please do so that you get notified when the toolkit has been published. I was like released. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get us started again because we do not have that much time. And I first want to talk about Pell Grants for incarcerated students. So some of you who may be aware of this work or just who may be aware of what happened during the tough on crime era may be familiar that in 1994 with the Violent Crime Control Act under President Clinton, there was a provision within that law that prohibited incarcerated students from receiving Pell Grants. And as some of you may already know, Pell Grant is the primary need-based aid for students from low-income backgrounds. And when you think about the demographic of incarcerated students, these individuals are disproportionately from low-income backgrounds. Just put it in context. And this was very detrimental for not only the incarcerated population, but higher education community in general. Before 1994, there were more than 700 higher education and prison programs. Just please keep that in mind. 700 programs. After the ban was implemented, that dropped down to about a dozen. And we found with research that a lot of the programs that were able to continue operating were able to do so through private funds and donations. But that was not the case across the spectrum. And so what happened, and one thing I want to actually make clear before we start talking about the reinstatement of Pell, is that when we talk about Pell being restated, we have to acknowledge the advocates who spent decades, nearly 20, more than 20 years, advocating for Pell reinstatement. So those individuals who were formerly incarcerated directly impacted the grassroots advocates. I always just want to acknowledge and shout them out because what we've seen in 2020 would not have happened with them today, who kept the hope that one day Pell would be reinstated for incarcerated individuals. And so after 1994, we've seen a couple policy changes that allow for the expansion of Pell, one of those being Second Chance Pell experimental sites initiatives under the former Secretary of Education, Dr. John B. King Jr. And with the Second Chance Pell sites, it allowed at the start for about 60 higher education institutions to go into prisons to provide college courses and college credit. The results and outcomes were phenomenal. Students talk about the transformational power of education. Students were graduating, were receiving degrees, so much so that under Betsy DeVos, she also extended and expanded the Second Chance Pell sites. Now we're looking at maybe 200 colleges hopefully being able to be imprisoned and using the Pell Grant program to provide higher education. I say all that to say, while Second Chance Pell is continuing, in December of 2020, Congress actually lifted the ban in the COVID-19 relief package. And in May of 2021, they had announced that they were intending to go through the negotiated rulemaking process. And later on in September, October, I'm getting my months mixed up, did announce that they were moving forward with a negotiated rulemaking process. While we at Trust did want early implementation, meaning that we wanted students who were incarcerated to have access in 2021, we do support the decision because we know now that there will be formal guidelines for higher education and prison programs, states, and departments of corrections. In the chat, we can also share the negotiated rulemaking listings because they are underway right now. So public hearings and conversations are happening. They actually have a prison education subcommittee, which does not happen normally. So it's just going to show the bipartisan momentum in support of this issue. And again, I'll be sure to put that link in the chat so folks who are interested in hearing more and just listening to what's going on and any recommendations that the subcommittee offer can be aware. Alexa and Robbie, is there anything else you want to share before I move to the next slide?
No, you did a really good summary of everything, so you covered it.
Perfect. Wanted to make sure. So I'll go to the next slide then. And this is just bringing it all together about why we created the Justice Fellows Policy Program. And so we at Trust has started doing a lot of the work at the intersection of higher education policy and the criminal legal system in 2018. We had just brought in the new president, Dr. John B. King Jr., and the former senior director of higher education policy, Dr. Tiffany Jones, was leading the higher ed policy team. And this was an issue that she wanted to work on. And so Tiffany and I began just getting involved in conversations, learning, okay, what are some of the issues, the intersectional issues being faced by this population? How can we get involved? How can we help? What resources can we use? And we were able to tap into the plethora of amazing individuals who are leading in this space, specifically those who are directly impacted, advocating on this issue. And at the same time, we had just launched our Equity in Higher Education Policy Lunch and Learn series in collaboration with the Institute of Higher Education Policy and the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. And for this Lunch and Learn series, we were bringing in higher education policy organizations who had a focus on equity, community organizers and grassroots and early career professionals who wanted to do higher education policy at the intersection of equity as well. And one day we just said, what would it look like to create something like this for justice impacted students specifically? Because one of the feedbacks that we kept receiving from advocates was like, use your sources, use your resources, compensate these individuals for their expertise, but also help us develop these skills, help these individuals who want to get into this space develop those skill sets, because policy, for those of you who are in this space, know it's very difficult. It can be difficult to navigate. You don't know where to start. You don't know the language. And so we wanted to do that with this, but we also wanted more voices in the room. A lot of the folks who were in the room who were making these decisions may not have been impacted. You know what I mean? They may not even know where to begin. And even till this day, though I do a lot of research in this, I learned from the Justice Fellows about the different barriers that they face when it comes to accessing higher education, whether that's in prison or once they are released. And so it's vital that individuals who are directly impacted by any policy, any issue, are at the forefront of these conversations. And that's what we hope to do with the Justice Fellows Policy Program. Eligibility requirements. So we were intentional in ensuring that we did not exclude individuals who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. We wanted folks to have this opportunity and wanted to be intentional about that. And so we just have 4 really buckets that you had to meet. You had to be formerly incarcerated or directly impacted, which we defined as spending time having been confined in a jail, prison, detention camp, or just had some engagement with the criminal legal system. If you were an early career professional, you couldn't have no more than 5 years of professional experience within the higher ed policy space specifically. You had to have explicit passion for higher education policies for justice impacted students, and you had to represent that within their responses. And then you had to be 18 years or older. I will say that when we created this, we did not anticipate the amount of folks who would be interested. We knew it was a need, or possibly knew it was going to be a need, just from the feedback that we had got from advocates and champions in the space. But we had over 400 applicants for this first cohort, over 400. And it was beyond difficult to even select the 8, which I'll show in the next slide. And so Ed Trust did not select the Justice Fellows. We actually have an advisory board of 15 individuals who are directly impacted or who operate their own higher ed and prison program with a focus on racial equity, who helped us select these individuals. So I didn't include the slide where it talks about our application process, but I will say we had 80 individuals who scored perfect scores, like perfect scores. And we had to bring that 80 down to 8. And so thank you. I don't think anyone's on from our advisory board, but I do want to thank them so much for just having those difficult conversations and cumbersome conversations, because it was 2 hours worth, 2 meetings worth 2 hours of just going back and forth. But we wanted to be intentional with this cohort. So the inaugural cohort, we have two wonderful women joining us today, Alexa and Rabia. We also have Mary on the line as well. But this is the first cohort. And our advisory board was intentional in making sure that this cohort was diverse in their geographical location, in their race, in their gender, in their experiences, and also the state imprisonment rate, which is something that we hadn't even thought about, which is why it was even more important. Again, an example of why it's important to have individuals directly impacted in these conversations and making the decisions, because they can see our blind spots. And Alexa and Robbie, I do want to share. Do you want to share anything about just being a part of the cohort before I just move on to the next slide?
I would just like to say, if I may, that it's one, when I heard about it, I started researching other organizations, and there was nothing else like it. There was nothing else. They weren't bringing those system impacted to the table to discuss these issues. And I still find that hard to believe. Like, why are not more people speaking of this? Why are not more organizations working on this? This is such a big issue. California and Texas, just in this panel, are the largest prison systems in the United States. So we should be talking more about this. And I want to thank EdTrust for being like the first ones to bring us on board and say, hey, you know what, let's just sit on the table and talk and let our voices be heard. So
Yes, and I would further on say that one of the things that I always say, I have mentioned it to my students, to my peers, to my colleagues. I was like, there is nothing like this. And so to be able to be part of this space, and a little bit about my background, I've been out only like it's been 11 months now. So to be able to voice my opinions, voice my experiences, my narratives in a space where I can talk to others who will literally help me throughout my journey of reentry and development, and provide me with the full support and the full love that we crave when we get out, right? So this to me was probably one of the best things that happened that have so much to do with my development. And I'm talking personal, I'm talking professional, and I'm talking about just looking at life through a critical lens, which I was missing out while I was incarcerated. So thank you for that. And I had to mention, I had to mention the 11 months because I was like, they picked me when I was fresh out. So just to be able to be picked when you're fresh out, you know how much confident booster that is for a person who's like, I have nothing in my pocket and I have to start all over again. This is real. So this is real, y'all. So being in the space, one of the things I was also worried was the intimidation, right? The intimidation. I'm fresh in this journey. I'm out in this new state, but it's such a wonderful experience. And so I would say that I would never give this space up for anything. And I would recommend people to look into furthering on spaces like this in other organizations and spaces because we need it, y'all. We need this.
Absolutely. And I know y'all are giving EdTrust credit as due, but I have to give the Justice Fellows credit. Something, and I'm sorry I'm going on a tangent, but this is important too to this presentation, is that they created this space for one another as well. This is how has been virtual the entire time. These individuals have not met each other in person. We'll be finally meeting in November, when we go to the National Conference for Higher Ed in Prison. But I tell Will and Kayla all the time, I could not have imagined that they would form a community like this. Like we provided what we could and encouraged and tried to really dismantle a lot of the professional white hierarchies and ways of operating to just say, here, like, let's be ourselves, present yourselves in whatever form you would like, and just for them to take it and run with it and just really have a community to where they can call on one another is just amazing. So just wanted to shout out the Justice Fellows as well. But let me get back to the why we're here today, the scans. And so now that we talked about the Justice Fellows, one of the things that they had to do as part of the fellowship was participate in the data research and analysis of the policy scans. And it was very important for us to do this work at the state level, because it's like states have work to do. And I've seen a couple comments in the chat saying this, like there's still work to be done. Even with the implementation of PLEL and ensuring that we create these guidelines, you still have to make sure we're holding people accountable. But states also need to support this momentum. So that means providing access to state financial aid, ensuring that students are being admitted into campuses and not being denied because of their criminal history record, ensuring that these students who may have some engagement with the criminal legal system have support and access to wraparound services. And we'll share a little bit more, Robbie and Alexa will, when we talk about the policy recommendations, but we wanted to pivot to states to say, hey, you see what's going on at the federal level, what are you doing, basically? And for folks who have joined, I'm going next. If you have joined, please do not tweet out any information just yet about the state policy scans. Right now we're just showing y'all some early findings and some of our recommendations. This will be published sometime in January, so you get the exclusive. Congratulations! That's why you should have came to this session. But yes, I just asked you all to just take a pause on sharing any information. And so I won't go through this in detail, but we are creating a toolkit. And this toolkit is looking at 8 states where EdTrust currently has a higher education presence. And in this toolkit, we'll have an executive summary to like frame this work and contextualize it for folks who may be unfamiliar. We'll also have messaging and talking points for advocates who may want to go to their state legislator and say, hey, these are some issues you need to be addressing, especially when we're talking about racial equity, when we're talking about access for students of color and students from low income backgrounds. You can't have those conversations without talking about students who are just as impacted as well. We'll also have a fact sheet that basically goes over the 2 tables that I'll show in the next 2 slides, where we're at answering the questions to, do they provide access to state financial aid? Do they have a state designated officer to help with the facilitation and the guidance of higher education in prison, so on and so forth. And this is our framework. So we asked 9 questions. When I show the table for each state, you'll see that it's only 8. And that is because even on the toolkit, number 2, where it says how many higher ed and prison programs are currently operating, we actually list those programs. And some are very extensive, like when you think about California, for example, or New York, who have been leading in this space when it comes to providing higher education in prison. And so we're just going to have a second document for that. But I did just want to flag if you're like, wait a second, there's 9 here, but 8 on the table. Again, if you have questions about the framework, please feel free to put it in the chat. We love to hear your reactions, your questions as we begin to finalize the final products for this toolkit. But without further ado, I'm actually going to hand it over to Alexa to share some of the early findings from Texas, some reactions, some of the limitations, or some of the issues that she encountered when she was doing her analysis.
Thank you, Satra. Patrick Rodriguez and I worked on this, and what we both found when dealing and doing the initial research for Texas is that there's no information. It was very difficult to find statistic wise. We wanted to do bar graphs and all this reporting of like even how many students are enrolled in these college programs while incarcerated. What is the number of like gender related from male to female? None of that information was available that we could find. So we reached out to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and we ran into some roadblocks and obstacles. They were not forthcoming. They didn't want to answer any of our questions. So a lot of our research, we wanted to do a deeper dive and like, where is this information? Why is no one just keeping a record of? Who do we contact? And the things that we did find, like the policy, hypothetically, when I read it on financial aid, I laughed because I was like, this looks great on paper. That's not how it works in the world. I did 19 years in Texas. I received 2 associates and a bachelor's degree. And I can tell you now that it does not work that way. That the reimbursement that they're so proud of doesn't work that way. You have to pay it back upon release. And who in their right mind wants to have this large debt loan in addition to parole fees, in addition to all the other fees that we have. We don't have jobs. We don't have, like Robbie said, we're walking out with nothing. And that was really surprising to me. And a lot of the policies that I read, that they look great. And if I wish they were implemented that way, I wish they did work the way they're written, because the world would be a better place, but they're not. And I can sit here and tell you the reality of it. Education, higher ed in prison in Texas for female in the South, it is not anything. There's no support. There is no, it's just obstacles, microaggression, roadblocks. It is a very difficult task. And my fear of, as Pell is being implemented, it, affordability, accessibility is not going to be, there needs to be oversight. There needs to be someone in charge, someone that we could, the transparency come into play here. And a lot of the issues that I ran across in doing the policy scans are not yes and no answers. They're yes and no answers, but let me explain. I have, there's a lot more to it than just black and white. There's still a lot of work to be done. And I found that we should be speaking about this more regularly. Higher education in prison is very important. As a female, I was only to receive my bachelor's. I wasn't able to receive my master's because I was told that women did not need an undergrad program because our place was in the home. And they're right. I am working from home, but I would really have liked to walk out with the master's or even continue my education. And why is it that even today we're not equal to the men? That's just not, I don't have no understanding on that. And I can go on and on and on, but the big one was like the financial aid. My parents paid for my classes. And when I started taking college, the classes were $130. And by the end, I was in upper level A&M. My classes were $750 for one class. And not many people can afford that. I was the only Latina in my graduating class for the past 10 years. There was only like 8 of us actively taking classes. And out of a unit of 644 females, only 8 of us, you could do the numbers. That's not even that's 1%, if that, not even 1%. So there's a lot to look at, and I'm really excited. That quote that everybody keeps saying, and I keep hearing in the space, is those that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but farthest from the resources. And I found myself saying, I am a resource. I'm right here. Ask me. I can tell you what needs to be done, or what can be done, or how it should be done. So I'm just excited for this, and I'm passing on to Rabia because I could go on and on.
Alexa, go on and on. This is the space. And one of the things I would say is that every time I think of a person here that has probably the amount of barriers and this, I mean, I see your face, right? I see your face because being a woman of color and you're incarcerated in the southern state, as the state of Texas, it is not easy, right? So and one of the stories that I would want to highlight with Alexa is that there are times that she had a pen, like she didn't even have enough papers to write her essays to turn in for the course.
Right. Remember, it was a 3-inch pencil with no eraser and 5 sheets of paper. And
Exactly.
that was my college experience. And it was a stamped notebook paper with the property of the state of Texas on there. And it was like my thoughts were property of the state of Texas. And I never forgot that. That was my college experience. A 3-inch pencil and 5 sheets of notebook paper.
And also, what did you have to do to get to the course on the bus?
Oh, okay. So I had to be transferred to another unit, which was a 3-hour class, became an 8-hour ordeal. I was not allowed to use the bathroom in those 8 hours, to eat, to relieve myself, to drink water. They'll tell you they allow us to, but they don't. I would get back to the unit. I couldn't shower for the day. So I had to choose whether I was going to basically not be able to eat in the chow hall that day, was I going to be able to shower that day, and just know that I wasn't going to be able to relieve myself for those like 6 to 8 hours in transit. Strip search 4 times, twice to get there and twice to return, shackled, sometimes handcuffed, always. Transported in a hot, smelly bus that was so hot people would pass out, or so cold you would be freezing. Yeah, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
It was bad. It was bad. And it's still doing this today. And that's what a fear is. Would our college programs gonna exploit the fact that Pell's being reinstated and want to have education in the system, but we're going to be so greedy to get them in there that we're going to overlook the quality of education that's going to be offered? Are they going to have to go through that to get to education, being strip searched 4 times, that I'm able to go to the bathroom? Is that what we're going back to because of Pell? I mean, I don't want it to, that's a fear that I have. And I look at other programs and I know that it can be done better. I'm researching it, I'm seeing it. New York is a great example of how like on point it is. And I'm reading all this and searching, and I'm like, it can be. You can't tell me that it's not working because it has worked in other states. So.
And then one of the things also with this restoration, right, is that who gets to sit on the bandwagon where they can actually fully immerse it themselves, because there's no accountability, right? There's the factor of accountability with these programs or these courses, and post secondary higher ed. Who, if somebody does run into a problem, who do we ask how to fix that? So my thing is that everybody wants to be on this agenda, but will it be done ethically? You know what I mean? There's so much sense of like morality also as well. So people will also capitalize in on this space where they're like, okay, now we have people that are able to get this access, but how do we make money out of this, right? But sometimes that's the fight, ethics and morality, but capitalism. And then at the end of the day, the advocates, like leaders ourselves, we're the ones who are doing all the work, making sure that there's the rights are restored, right? There's equity. There's also equity with institutions where you have men and females. And so one of the things I did feel, how do you say, lucky in this privilege, in the sense that I was able to scan out the facilities, the 35 different prison systems in California, to see which higher education programs are connected with what university and what college. So that scan, that research was actually very accessible. I utilized a lot of data from Vera. That was very helpful. And then it's been kept updated. The good thing about California is we have amazing leaders, right? We have amazing leaders who promote this agenda of accessing post-secondary higher education for incarcerated students and formerly incarcerated students. So we have a lot of data and research being done by formerly incarcerated scholars. And that right there helped me also do the scan in a way that I didn't feel overwhelmed. Yes, there's a lot of cracks in the sense, but those cracks fall into the policy implementation. Those cracks are seen in ways that the legislation is working. And I don't want to deep dive too much into that. I want to keep it simple to the fact that I do appreciate that California does run the agenda where they are allocating funding into these organizations that would push the agenda, force higher education institutions to have formerly incarcerated students in their educational facilities, right? So that it gives them incentives to out to how do you say, like, outreach their work. So then there are being inclusive to students who have been incarcerated. So California State Institution does a really good job with student services programs and organizations, and I'm a huge part of that system itself, because after this Pell Restoration was like, after this implementation, we have to also understand what happens next, right? How do we also ensure, like Alexa said, the quality, and also to be able to continue the progression and retainment of this. So I think that the idea is that there's a lot work to be done, but however, California is opening a lot of doors towards this, and so we will see a lot of leaders and advocates to push in the agenda where there is equity seen, because equity has started, y'all. So um
Thank you.
I
And
was going to ask you, if I may, what about Ban the Box, Rabia? How is that in California?
so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. August 3rd, 2020, right? I mean, this was amazing. So ban the box, question passed, um with the for the students who are formerly incarcerated, and they're able to just knock out the question of regarding their conviction history. So now there's this huge improvement seen with students who are getting out and they want to continue higher education, because like I said, in reality of re-entry, academic becomes a part of your life when you are pursuing academia while you're incarcerated. So ban the box got passed, and I'm so, like I said, grateful to be in a state where they are pushing the agenda, because having that question cleared out from the application process itself, I mean, it literally erases a lot of stigmas for the one person, for the formerly incarcerated student who is seeking higher education. Because everywhere, y'all, we gotta make sure we ensure that our record follows us through, our past follows us through to everything. So being having it now, you are seeing so many formerly incarcerated scholars seeking out to master's degrees, because they're not just stopping at bachelor's.
Mm-mm.
We're not pushing the agenda like get your associate degree or no, we're seeing postdoctoral programs opening up for formerly incarcerated students in California. And one of the things I would do say that it's a great West Side, this side is a great space for a formerly incarcerated person who is pursuing, PhDs. Now you got PhDs. You have doors opening in systems of UCLA, USC. I mean, you have CSU system, and they're pushing for the agenda that they're not just stopping us to attain bachelors. Now we're getting into masters, PhDs, postdoctorals, and even further. So we're going to be professors. You know what I mean? We're going to see formerly incarcerated professors over here in California.
You're looking at two of them right now, um, in the future. But I am keeping an eye for time, and we're running very close. So if you do not mind, Alexa and Robbie, I'm going to continue. Is that cool with you? Okay, perfect. And so these are just some of the policy recommendations. Again, I won't go through each of them just because you will have access to all of this sometime in January. But just wanted to give you some preview of them. And as you read through this, please also ask your questions in the chat. So I see a couple questions already in here. I've seen one from Will that I'll present to Alexa and Rabia, and I'll chime in. But I do want to just say thank you to both of them for joining for today's session. Thank you all for joining, and let's get to the Q&A. So the first question from Will was, were you able to see what programs were offered in your research? And could you share more about what some of those programs were?
Well, that was the easy question, because for the females, there's only one program offered. That's collegiate, which is associates in general studies and a bachelor's in business. They have other vocationals, but we're not speaking of vocationals. We're speaking of higher education. The men, I believe, had 4 or 5 different graduate programs, but the one that we were looking at, and that was easily found on their website from my end, from Texas. But Rabia?
Yes, so I was able to run through the 34 programs being offered. And the good thing was that after, there's actually a pipeline now, right? So we're creating a pipeline from prison to school. So you have an access to continuing your educational, let's say like California State University at LA is offering the program in San Quentin, right? So you have a pipeline now that after you leave incarceration and you want to continue the education, you have 2 3 classes to take, you can go to that university. There's a way to. So I was able to look at the programs, and was able to look into those 34 programs, and most of them are up to bachelor's degrees. However, we see a lot of rise in the, how do I say this, like the continuation of bachelor's degree from incarceration is seen when they are released. You see them actually going to the institution itself, right? So the AA and AS is accessible. And we're not talking about vocational trainings because that's another topic, but there is really good information on when you land at an institution, what programs are available, because it's tied directly to the educational facility itself,
Thank you. Thank you. And then I'm looking at the next question from Kayla. I'll speak to the second half of the question. which is how do we define a streamlined ID process? And then Alexa and Rabia, if either of you, Rabia, I'm really looking at you, want to talk about how the importance of an ID. But when we say streamlined process, that means that from the time that we know that an individual is going to be released, whether that's 60 days or 30 days before, there is a process for them to receive their IDs and all the documentation required for that, so that when they are released, they have that ID in hand. A lot of states, not a lot of states, some of the states that we've seen, there was no process at all. So they just showed up, they were released, and then they had to go to like the Secretary of State with all the documents, find a way there, first of all, and provide that documentation, find that documentation in order to get their ID. But Alexa, I'm going to be quiet if you want to share more, or Rabia, about why is it important to have that process in place.
I want to say something about this, y'all. So I just barely handled dealt with a situation that I was able to get my ID. It took me, I mean, I'm saying 10 months to get my documentation, and California still would not issue me a state issued ID because I was released from another state. So there is no the gap over there is, and I'm not going to deep dive into that, but to streamline the process of identification is so important, because the first thing you do is take care of your medical, your housing, your employment, and you cannot get none of those without an identification. I don't know how I had a job without an ID, y'all, but it's unreal that I still struggle. I still don't have my driver license. I still there's so many things, right? So CGCR uh implements, and I'm talking about this is just on papers, right? So we actually don't know how it is implemented, which I will deep dive into that hopefully in the next, you know what I mean, meetings. Um, CDCR has to offer this, supposed to offer every institution 13 months before release that you are able to access. They're supposed to work on your ID while you're incarcerated, and then you walk out with that. So 13 months prior to your release date, the institution has to allocate the process of a person to receive their ID or driver license if they were already issued a license before. So in state of California, I don't see that being done. Like there are people that are going through immigration issues. So now this, you know, we're talking about people who are the US citizens. So what about immigration issues, right? So the streamlined process is easy for a person if you're born in America, if you're born in the United States, but it is so different for a person who is not born here. And so when you're released, um, there's also the difficulty of getting an ID without having your agent helping you with the forms. I've seen that issue also as well, because the thing happens is that your prison ID is not even recognized at DMV. My Texas prison ID is never recognized anywhere, y'all. So I couldn't even use that to upheld myself to get a state issued ID. I had a social security card, however, I had to go back and prove my U.S. citizenship that I had received 15 years ago again, to be able to even apply for a state issued ID. And I will let Alexa actually talk about more, because I can keep on about this ID.
Just briefly, Texas has a streamlined process, but it works great if you are from the state. But you're also running into barriers, like Rabia says, being out of state. What if you can't find your birth certificate because it's under your maiden name and you're divorced or remarried? What if you're under an alias inside the system? And then there's a lot of obstacles, but they do try to implement it and have it when you walk out. So that is a plus, but there's still some work to be done, as in all policies. Rabia has been a trooper trying to find and solidify everything. We spoke briefly earlier, and I said, hey, I'm in Texas. I can go somewhere if I need to help you, because here it is 11 months down the road and she's still having problems. So maybe I need to go physically knock on some doors, but the ID itself is essential. In Texas, it is said that our TDCJ ID is a recognizable ID, but not in another state. So that didn't help Rabia as she left California. So that, it's still a big issue, but there's just a lot of work to be done still, and I'm eager to
Yeah.
do it.
And the crazy thing is, Alexa, I left the state of Texas for the sanity of my reentry, right? To be able to pursue higher education. And then I'm walking out with my my TDCJ ID, and I'm pretty much that means nothing over here in the state of California, right? And it clearly is the same ID format that CDCR uses. But the fact is that in my mind, I'm like, I'm leaving this state because as a recovering drug addict myself, and I proudly say recovering. I'm in recovery, been sober for clean for a long time. They always teach you, right, places, things, and environment. So yes, people, places, and things. So I changed my location to be closer to people that I felt like supported me more so. And so being able to do that, I'm like, I'm not even recognized here, part of the system. So like I said, the struggle keeps going, but to deal with the federal government itself when it comes to DMV, there's a lot of work to be done. But also, please, if anybody does suffer those problems, don't be afraid to ask for help and support and ask questions how you can manage and how you can turn this around and how you can find answers. Because that's what I did. Because honestly, I wouldn't be able to sort this out on my own. But there is a lot of support that you can ask, right? With the community, with your peers and your mentors. So
And a lot of the work should be done prior to
mhm.
release. Like we should be educated on what we're going to experience when we're released. Like Robbie, you told me you had like tickets prior to that. Those tickets could have been taken care of potentially while you were inside preparing to be released. So therefore, it would have been one less thing. But it's just not. There's no encouragement. There is no incentive for them to
Yeah.
help us anyway. So
Yeah, they suspended basically my driver license while I was already incarcerated. So I wasn't able to even renew my driver license. But the facility that I was in Texas, honestly, they didn't even offer anything to me. But like I said, I did a lot of my time in solitary confinement. So maybe that's part of the fact that I was treated horribly. But
no,
in reality,
it's horrible across the board, friend.
horrible across the board. And so I'm sitting over here trying to see if I can get a Texas license. California license. Have no idea. I gotta work on this suspension in Texas. So Alexa, I'm calling you. You know what I mean? I just found that out yesterday, y'all. So it's been a crazy week for me. But like I said, we never give up. We've always got to find, and one thing is, we always got to find loopholes. There's gotta be loopholes in these scenarios, in these situations where you're like, I need this done ASAP. I've came so further along in my process, in my life, in my recovery. Um, this is not going to be. But me talking about these issues are important because as a woman of color, as an immigrant woman, I'm a Pakistani woman. In our society, we don't talk about these little issues. So me being out here talking about it is only going to help the next one. And I know there's a lot of our brothers and sisters in line waiting for us to voice, to speak on their behalf. And so,
And so actually wrap us up on that note. We are over. But Robbie and Alexa, I know we can go all day. That's why I'm like, it's only 45 minutes. We could use a whole hour and a half. But I do want to thank everyone that stayed on, everyone that asked questions. If we did not get to answer your question, please feel free to shoot us an email. We can continue to have these conversations offline. But again, thank you all for staying. Thank you, Alexa and Rabia, for this informative conversation and just for bringing yourselves to the conversation. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and just continue to have these conversations in your own spaces.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
thank you, everyone. And I apologize I kept blabbing, but
Don't
this is the struggle. This is struggle of a colored woman in reentry, y'all. And we have to talk about this. And so I want to thank my amazing peer here, Alexa. I want to thank an amazing mentor, Satra, for letting a person like myself be able to voice these concerns because it's got to come out of some Pakistani girl. And I want to be the first one to say this. So thank y'all. And hopefully where we share these spaces more so often, it's part of this growth and my development as it is. And like I said, thank you all for listening in, for real.
Thank you. See y'all.